Julian, by the time this tape reaches you, Camille will have returned the ring. Your board will have voted 11-1. The office with your name etched into the glass will belong to someone else. 3 of the men who once introduced you as their closest friend will now speak to you only through attorneys. Your invitations have stopped, your calls go unanswered, and tomorrow morning, if your lawyers have finally decided to tell you the truth, you will walk into federal court without the certainty that you will walk back out through the same door. You have spent the last 2 years asking one question: why is this happening to me? I thought you deserved an answer. My name is Daniel Harrow. You knew me as Emily's father, the quiet man at the funeral. Gray suit, black tie, standing beside the photograph of my daughter while you moved through the room with your hand on people's shoulders and grief arranged carefully across your face. You found me near the back after the reporters had finished taking pictures. You held out your hand, and you said, "I'm sorry I couldn't save her." I remember. I remember the pressure of your palm and the way you lowered your voice when you said her name. Practiced sorrow can look almost identical to the real thing when a man has spent years learning what people want to see. I answered you with 2 words. So am I. You believed I was broken that day. I was. What you did not understand was that broken things can still measure weight. For the last 2 years, Julian, I have been measured. Not your money, not your company. I measured the distance between what you said and what the records showed. The people who benefited when Emily took the blame, and the questions everyone stopped asking once the public had chosen a villain. You built your life on the belief that people remember stories better than documents. You were right for a while. The trouble begins when someone has the patience to put the documents back in order. And I had time. Before you, Emily was terrible at asking for permission. I loved that about her. It also frightened me. At 27, she rented a narrow storefront between a laundromat and a bakery and called it the Open Window Project. The roof leaked, the heating failed. She bought folding tables from a school auction and persuaded local artists to teach weekend classes. I told her she needed insurance before murals. She told me nobody ever fell in love with a liability policy. That was Emily, impulsive, proud, certain she could survive whatever arrived because she had survived the last thing. She was not a saint, Julian. I will not make her into one now because she is dead. She ignored advice, signed things too quickly, and hated admitting when she was frightened. When she thought I was judging her, she stopped calling just to prove she did not need me. Then you appeared. Cross Meridian sponsored one of her youth programs. You remembered the names of the children. You stayed late after the photographs. You asked Emily about her work instead of telling her about yours. At least that is how she described it. 6 months later, she brought you home for dinner. You complimented the old clock in my hallway. Most people never noticed it. I remember thinking you were observant. I should have asked what else you noticed. For 2 years, your money moved closer to Open Window. Then your advisors did. Then your contracts. Emily told me the paperwork was temporary. She said Cross Meridian had better lawyers and better systems. She said you were helping Open Window grow without losing its soul. I asked whether she understood everything she was signing. She became angry. I became clinical. That was a habit I had spent 40 years mistaking for wisdom. My job had trained me to believe that every fear could be reduced to a sequence. Preserve the records, build the timeline, identify the contradiction. So when Emily called me one night and said, "Dad, he makes me explain things I never did until I start wondering whether I did them," I did not say what she needed to hear. I did not say, "I believe you." I said, "Then document everything. There are sentences a father remembers because they were kind, and there are sentences he remembers because he would give almost anything to take them back. That is mine." The scandal started 6 months later. At first it was a financial review, then reporters called. Documents surfaced with Emily's signature. Payments had passed through accounts connected to Open Window. By the end of the week, caution was gone. The non-profit executive at the center of the scandal. That phrase followed her everywhere. You, meanwhile, became the betrayed sponsor. You gave one interview. Only one. That was enough. You said you had trusted someone you loved. You said you were heartbroken. You never called Emily a thief. You were too careful for that. You simply stood in front of a camera, looked wounded, and allowed everyone else to finish the accusation for you. Emily called me the night the story aired. She was crying and furious at herself for crying. She said some of the signatures were hers. She said some decisions had been careless. Then she said, "But I didn't design this, Dad." I asked her to send me everything. Agon, the investigator before the father. For weeks I worked through what she gave me. And here is the part you never understood about me, Julian. I did not begin by assuming my daughter was innocent. I checked. I looked at the possibility that Emily had lied to me, lied to her staff, lied to herself. Because love does not make evidence cleaner, it only makes the truth harder to survive. She had made mistakes. She signed documents she should have read more carefully and hid details because she knew I would tell her to walk away from you. Those facts hurt, but they were not the facts you were counting on me to find. 3 weeks before her funeral, I found the first one. A transfer had been described publicly as an open window decision initiated by Emily. Her name was on the final authorization page. But the internal approval timestamp attached to the transaction existed 47 minutes before Emily's authorization was entered. That meant someone with higher-level access had approved the movement before the document made it to her. It did not prove fraud. It did not prove innocence. It did one very important thing. It made your story incomplete. I called Emily. She did not answer. That was not unusual then. She was meeting with an attorney named Lena Ortiz and trying, for the first time in months, to build a chronology instead of defending herself one accusation at a time. That night it rained hard. Her car left the road on a curve 23 miles outside the city. The police found no sign another vehicle forced her off. There was no evidence that you caused the crash. I will not give you a crime that does not belong to you, Julian. You already had enough of your own. But I will tell you what I believed then and what I believe now. You did not have to touch that car to help destroy the things that made Emily believe tomorrow might be worth reaching. After the funeral, I went to her apartment. There were boxes everywhere, legal papers, half-finished grant applications, coffee cups, and a dead plant she had once insisted was impossible to kill. In the back of a closet, beneath a stack of old sketchbooks, I found a Panasonic cassette recorder I had bought her when she was 11. Beside it was a tape. On the label, in Emily's handwriting, were 5 words. Things I don't want to forget. I sat on the floor and played it. There was no confession, no secret meeting, no evidence, just rain against a bedroom window, her mother calling us to dinner, Emily laughing so hard she could barely breathe, and my own younger voice somewhere in the background telling her not to waste the whole tape on weather. I listened to that recording until the batteries weakened and the voices slowed. Then I looked at the boxes around me. For most of my life, I believed facts arrived eventually, if you preserved them correctly. Emily died before hers did. That night I understood something I should have understood when she was still alive. Truth does not move by itself. Sometimes someone has to carry it. So I carried hers, every page, every date, every contradiction. And the first thing I discovered, Julian, was that Emily had lied to me. The second was that she had lied to protect you. The first thing I took from you was certainty, not money. Not Camille, not your office, certainty. For almost 9 months after Emily died, I did nothing you could see. That matters. You have probably spent the last 2 years imagining a moment when I decided to come after you. A night when grief hardened into revenge. Perhaps you picture me sitting at a kitchen table with your photograph in front of me, drawing lines between names, planning how to dismantle your life. There was no such moment. For most of that first year, I was not even sure you had committed a crime. I was sure you had lied. Those are not the same thing, so I did what I should have done when Emily first called me frightened. I slowed down. I became the legal representative of her estate. I worked with Lena Ortiz to separate what belonged to Emily from what remained protected, disputed, or irrelevant. I read her calendar, her emails, her contracts, her notes from meetings, not just the pages that made you look guilty. All of them. Some days I found evidence that embarrassed my daughter. She had signed agreements without understanding every clause. She had hidden financial problems from her staff. She had allowed her personal relationship with you to influence decisions that should have been made at arm's length. I wrote those things down too. You see, Julian, I did not need Emily to be innocent. I needed the story told about her to be true. It wasn't the 47-minute discrepancy was only the beginning. There were other small fractures. An invoice created after the date Emily supposedly approved it. A board briefing where Open Window's role was described differently from the version later given to reporters. A reimbursement Emily had questioned in writing, even though you later said she had personally requested it. Nothing dramatic. Nothing I could place on a table and say, there, that is the whole lie. But that is rarely how fraud looks when competent people are involved. The most useful evidence is often boring. A date, a copied recipient, a version number, the wrong person knowing something too early. By spring, I had enough questions to begin asking them outside my apartment. Carefully, I sent one transaction summary to an accountant who had worked on an early cross-meridian review. No accusation. Just a question, could this approval sequence occur in the order publicly described? I contacted a former Open Window administrator and asked whether Emily normally initiated transfers of that size. I asked Lena whether a particular authorization structure had ever been explained to Emily before she signed, and I requested public filings connected to 2 entities that had benefited from the transactions. That was all 3 questions, 2 records requests, 1 former employee. And somewhere inside cross-meridian, someone told you. I know because your behavior changed. Before then, you had spoken about Emily only when necessary. Suddenly your attorneys contacted Open Window's remaining board members to remind them of confidentiality obligations. Your communications team updated an old statement on the company website. You asked finance staff to locate documents connected to an inquiry no one had formally opened. That was when I knew the questions mattered. Not because you answered them, because you reacted to them. You were accustomed to crises you could see, a headline, a lawsuit, a hostile board member, a person standing across from you saying, "Ah, I know what you did. You understood enemies." What unsettled you were questions without a face attached. You began calling Russell Kane, your former chief financial officer. Russell had left Cross-Meridian 18 months before Emily died, after what the company described as a disagreement over strategy. You assumed he was talking. He wasn't, not yet. Then you suspected a former auditor, then Lena. At one point, according to someone who later spoke to Mira Vale, you became convinced Emily had created an archive designed to destroy you after her death. That would have been convenient, wouldn't it? A dead woman reaching from the grave with one perfect file. But Emily had not built a trap. She had been too frightened and too confused. What she left behind was worse for you. Fragments. Fragments require other people to look. And once people start looking, they tend to notice things you never intended them to compare. The first thing I took from you was certainty. I did not need you to know I was there. I needed you to realize that something you believed was finished had started moving again. Then there was Camille. I had seen her before I knew her name. A photograph in a business magazine. You were standing beside her at a foundation dinner, both of you smiling toward the camera. She was wearing a dark green dress. You had one hand lightly against her back, The caption called her Camille Rhodes, a corporate communications strategist. Your fiancé. I remember staring at that photograph for longer than I should have. Not because you had moved on. Emily was dead. I had no claim over what your private life should look like. What bothered me was Camille's expression. She looked certain too, so I researched her. Not her private accounts, not her home, not anything that required me to cross a line. Her work was public. Camille had spent 15 years advising companies during acquisitions, litigation, executive transitions. She was smart, careful, more experienced with public narratives than Emily had ever been, which meant I had a question. How did a woman like that believe your version of Emily? The answer was simple. You had gotten there first. During the scandal, Camille had helped advise one of your outside communications firms. She had seen documents selected by your team. She had heard you describe Emily as brilliant but unstable under pressure. You told Camille you had tried to protect Emily long after others advised you to cut ties. You told her that people around Emily had taken advantage of her generosity. That sentence caught my attention. Not because it was unusual, because I had seen it before. In one of Emily's saved messages, you had written, "Everyone around you is taking advantage of your kindness." 6 months later, in another exchange, "Only I understand how much pressure you're under." And during the worst week of the scandal, "Don't explain yourself to people who have already decided you're guilty." None of those sentences was evidence of a crime. But together they described a method. First, tell someone the world is using them. Then position yourself as the only person who truly understands, and discourage them from testing your version against anyone else's. Emily had called it love until she began calling it confusion. I wondered what Camille called it. I did not contact her immediately. That would have been a mistake. A grieving father reaching out to his daughter's replacement would look exactly like what you would say it was. Obsession. So, I waited, then I found something she could verify without believing a single word from me. A travel schedule. The previous year, you had told Camille you were in Zurich negotiating a partnership. Public records placed you at an investor retreat outside Boston for 2 of those days. That, by itself, meant very little. Until I found an expense tied to a private investment vehicle you had never disclosed to her. Even though Camille had publicly advised that same entity on behalf of a client, it was not proof of betrayal. It was a conflict, a question she had the professional skill to answer herself. I sent her 1 envelope. No return address. Inside were copies of public records and a single page. No accusation. No story about Emily. 1 sentence. Ask him why these dates do not match. That was all. You have probably spent a great deal of time imagining what I told her next. Nothing. Camille found the rest herself. The travel discrepancy led to the investment vehicle. That led to messages. The messages led to dates. And the dates brought her back to Emily. For the first time, Camille read material your communications team had never selected for her. Not rumors. Emily's own correspondence. Your words. She saw the same sentences. Everyone around you is taking advantage of your kindness. Only I understand the pressure you're under. Don't explain yourself to people who have already decided you're guilty. 3 phrases. 2 women. Different years. The same man. She asked you about it. I know roughly how the conversation went because Camille later described part of it to investigators. You did what you had always done well. You stayed calm. You told her grief made patterns where none existed. You said Emily's father was unable to accept his daughter's responsibility. You suggested someone was manipulating Camille because they knew she was compassionate. Then you made the mistake. You told her, "You're letting other people's bitterness contaminate what we have." Camille had found an almost identical sentence in an old message to Emily. You did not lose Camille because I persuaded her you were dangerous. You lost her because, when she gave you an opportunity to tell the truth, you reached for the same script. 3 days later, The ring was left with your attorney. You called her 21 times. She answered once. After that, communications went through counsel. I did not take Camille from you. I introduced her to the version of you Emily already knew. And once Camille stepped away, other things became quieter. A couple you dined with every month postponed twice, then stopped rescheduling. One donor asked for clarification on a foundation commitment. A conference placed your keynote under review. An investor pushed a private meeting into the next quarter. None of them announced that they were abandoning you. That would have been easier. Public enemies give a man something to fight. Silence gives him only himself. You started watching rooms. Who arrived late? Who left early? Who stopped laughing? You called Russell again. You asked an old friend whether Camille had spoken to anyone. You told people a coordinated campaign was forming against you. But there was no campaign. That was the part you could not understand. No single person was controlling everyone. There were only people who had finally been given enough information to ask their own questions. You spent 6 months looking for the enemy. You never considered the possibility that there wasn't one. There were only people finally comparing notes. You were right about Russell Kane. Eventually, but not in the way you imagined. When I first met him, Russell did not hand me a folder marked with your guilt. He did not have a secret recording. He did not tell me you had confessed anything. He was a former chief financial officer who had left Cross Meridian angry, tired, and very aware that anything he said about you would be dismissed as bitterness. That made him useful for one reason. He understood the machinery. I met him in a diner 40 miles outside the city. He arrived early, ordered coffee, and spent the first 20 minutes explaining why he did not want to become part of a revenge campaign. I told him neither did I. Then I placed 3 transaction summaries on the table. No conclusions, just dates, approval sequences, and the names of the people attached to them. Russell read the first page twice. Then he said something I had been waiting almost a year to hear. Emily couldn't have done this alone. Not because she was incapable, because she did not have the authority. That distinction mattered. Cross Meridian's public story had allowed people to believe Emily used her non-profit position to direct money through a structure she controlled. But certain transfers required executive authorization before Open Window ever received the documents. Emily could sign, she could recommend, she could approve things placed in front of her. What she could not do was create the underlying authorization inside your company. Russell showed me which positions could. Yours was one of them. Agon, not proof of a crime. Proof that the story was missing a room. And you were standing in it. Russell helped me understand where to look. He showed me how board packets were assembled, where conflict disclosures normally appeared, which transactions should have triggered outside review, and which records were likely held by independent counsel rather than company management. That was all I needed from him. I did not ask Russell to accuse you. I asked him to explain the system. Then the system started explaining you. A transaction Emily had supposedly initiated had been discussed internally before she was ever copied. A conflict involving one of your affiliated entities had been described to the board in language far narrower than the financial records supported. An early risk memo showed senior leadership new questions had been raised months before your public statement claiming the problems came as a shock. Individually, each fact could be explained. Together, they required an investigation, so that was where I sent them, not to social media, not to one of your competitors, to outside counsel representing the board. I included the source of every record I was legally entitled to share. I separated facts from questions, and at the top of the packet I wrote one sentence. I am Emily Harrow's father. Assume that makes me biased. Verify everything independently. That probably surprised you. You always believed emotion made people easier to discredit. I decided to save your lawyers the effort. The board did not remove you that week. It did not even suspend you. First, they retained outside investigators. Then auditors asked questions. Then counsel requested records. Slowly, procedurally, boringly. That is how serious consequences often begin. You called it harassment. You told directors this was a coordinated effort by people who resented your success. You blamed Russell. You blamed Camille. You blamed Emily's estate. At one meeting, you reportedly said, "Everyone in this room needs to decide whether we are running a company or indulging a dead woman's father." I was not in the room. I did not need to be. Because by then the questions were no longer mine. They belonged to people with fiduciary duties. And boards do not betray men, Julian. They abandon risk. While they were reviewing the company, I contacted Mira Vale. You remembered Mira during Emily's scandal. She wrote one of the pieces that helped fix your version of events in the public mind. She described you as a founder caught in a non-profit controversy created by someone you had once trusted. She did not call Emily guilty. She did something more powerful. She made your explanation sound reasonable. That was why I chose her. Not because I thought she hated you, because she had once believed you. Myra met me in her newsroom conference room. She listened for 15 minutes, then stopped me. "You're her father," she said. "Yes, you want her name cleared. Yes, so why should I trust your interpretation?" "You shouldn't." She waited. I slid the chronology across the table. "Then prove me wrong." That was the first time she looked interested. I gave Mira less than she expected, the public records, a list of former employees she could approach independently, transaction dates, statements you had made in interviews, disclosures already available through legitimate sources. I did not give her confidential strategy. I did not ask her to publish a conclusion. I gave her questions I had already tried to disprove myself. Then Myra disappeared for 4 months. She did not tell me what she found. Good journalists are irritating that way. During those months, the board review deepened. Your suspension was announced on a Thursday morning. Temporary. The statement said, "Pending review." Your spokesperson insisted you remained committed to Cross Meridian. By Friday, your key card no longer opened the executive floor. I heard that detail from Russell. He thought I would enjoy it. I didn't. That surprised me. For almost 2 years, I had imagined what it would feel like to see you lose the room where you had made so many decisions. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I thought about Emily sitting at my kitchen table with 3 folders open, telling me she was afraid something had been put in her name. Your office meant nothing to me. 2 weeks later, the board voted. 11-1, you resigned under terms negotiated through counsel. The announcement used soft words: leadership transition, governance review, best interests of the company. Your name remained on the building for another month. Then one morning, maintenance removed it from the glass. I did not go watch. Taking your company gave me nothing. Then Myra called. Her investigation was going to run on Sunday. She told me what it would say before publication, because part of it concerned Emily's estate. The article did not declare my daughter innocent. I am grateful for that. Emily had made mistakes. She had approved transactions she did not fully understand. She had concealed conflicts from people who trusted her. Myra wrote all of it. Then she wrote what had been missing the first time. Emily had not designed the financial structure. She did not possess the authority required to initiate several of the transactions later attributed to her. Cross Meridian executives had discussed some transfers before Open Window was formally involved. And evidence showed that you knew material risks existed before the public was told you had been blindsided by them. The headline was almost disappointingly calm: Dramatization Scandal Revicide. Who actually controlled the money? No photograph of you looking evil. No photograph of Emily looking tragic, just evidence. It was enough. Other outlets followed. Old stories were amended. Commentators who once called Emily the architect of the scheme began using different words: negligent, compromised. manipulated. None of them brought her back, but they moved her from monster to human being. And human was all I had ever wanted the record to allow her to be. 3 weeks after Mira's article, Open Windows Board held a small gathering. No cameras, no speech from me. They had repaired the original storefront. Someone repainted the window frames. Inside, on the wall near the entrance, they restored a photograph that had been removed during the scandal. Emily, 28 years old, paint on her sleeve, grinning beside 6 children holding canvases. Below it was one word, founder. I stood in front of that photograph until the room emptied, then I cried. Not at your resignation. Not when Camille left. Not when your friends stopped answering. There. Because taking your company gave me nothing. Giving my daughter back her name was the first thing that felt like justice. That should have been the end. For me, in many ways it was. I stopped looking for new doors to open. I had what I came for. Emily's story had changed. Her name was no longer being used to protect yours. But investigations develop a life of their own once enough people begin asking the same questions. External counsel had records I had never seen. Auditors found transactions Mira never knew existed. Former employees who had stayed silent while you were powerful began returning calls. And somewhere inside that growing pile of evidence, people whose job was not to write articles or protect shareholders began paying attention. That was the night I stopped caring whether you lost anything else. Unfortunately for you, Julian. By then, other people had started looking. The law arrived last. That is important, Julian, because I know the story you have been telling yourself. You needed to believe I had orchestrated everything. The board, Camille, Myra, the investigators, the subpoenas, the prosecutors. If one man controlled all of it, then perhaps you were still important enough to require a conspiracy. You weren't. By the time federal investigators became interested, I was no longer carrying anything to anyone. The board had its own records. Myra had her own sources. Auditors had questions that did not begin with Emily. And former employees had finally started speaking to people whose business cards frightened them more than yours did. The first subpoena did not come to me. It went to Cross Meridian. Then to one of the affiliated entities Russell had helped me understand. Then to a financial institution connected to transactions I had never seen. I learned about some of them from the news. Others came out later through court filings. For the first time in 2 years, things were happening that I had not anticipated. I found that comforting. Justice should eventually become too large for one grieving father to steer. Investigators interviewed Russell. They interviewed former finance staff. They spoke with vendors. They reviewed communications surrounding the same approval chains the board had examined. And then they spoke to you. That was where you began making choices I could never have made for you. You had spent years surviving by controlling what other people knew and when they knew it. But an investigation changes the mathematics. One person asks about a meeting. Another asks about a transfer. A third already has a message you thought no one else had seen. The story that worked when everyone held only one piece becomes dangerous when the pieces are placed on the same table. You adjusted. That was your instinct. You clarified one statement, then another. A record was described as preliminary. A conversation became informal. A decision you once remembered clearly became something you could no longer recall. Your attorneys eventually stopped letting you improvise, probably wise. Then investigators discovered that after the board review began, records related to one affiliated transaction had been moved out of an ordinary archive process. I do not know who first suggested that. I do not know whether you ordered it. The government will have to prove what it claims. I will not do their work for them. But I know this much. When people began asking questions, you did not behave like a man relieved that the truth was finally being examined. You behaved like a man trying to control the order in which it arrived. That was not something I could expose for you. You had to do that yourself. I opened doors. You chose what to do when you saw who was standing behind them. By the time the indictment was announced, reporters had begun using words that still felt strange to me. Conspiracy, statements, financial misconduct, possible obstruction. Some of the counts were broader than Emily. That mattered too. She had been one part of a system, not the center of your universe. Not even the center of your wrongdoing, if the government proves its case. Just the person you believed would carry the weight best because she loved you, and because everyone already understood how easily a troubled non-profit executive could become a headline. Now, you are sitting in a room that no longer looks like yours. I know roughly what is around you, not because I have been watching. Because your attorneys listed the residence in a court filing when your travel restrictions were imposed. The furniture is rented. Your passport has been surrendered. You can travel locally for meetings with counsel, medical appointments and court appearances subject to the conditions the judge imposed. You are not in prison, not yet, and perhaps you never will be. That is not for me to decide. Tomorrow is a hearing. Your lawyers will argue. The government will argue. A judge will decide what happens next. There was a time when I imagined wanting to be in that courtroom. I imagined sitting behind the prosecutors where you could see me. I imagined what your face would look like when you realized I was there. I no longer want that. You have been looking for me for 2 years. You do not get to make tomorrow about me, so I sent the tape instead. Look around the room, Julian. Camille's ring is gone. Your office is gone. The board is gone. Most of the men who once called at midnight to ask your opinion have discovered they can survive without it. The newspapers no longer use your photographs to illustrate innovation. Your lawyers have probably told you to stop reading them altogether. For months, I thought those losses would matter to me. I thought I would keep a list. Certainty. Loathe. Applause the company. Your public story. Your freedom. 6 lessons. 6 pillars removed one at a time. That was how I organized it, because organization is what men like me do when grief becomes too large to hold with bare hands. But I was wrong about something. I did not take those things from you. Camille left because she saw the pattern. Your friends stepped back because they compared your stories. The board removed you because the risk became larger than their loyalty. Myra published because the evidence survived her skepticism. Investigators came because their own records led them there. I did not destroy your life. I removed the lies holding it in place. There is a difference. I need you to understand that because there was one thing I did want to take from you. Something I wanted so badly that for months it embarrassed me. I wanted your peace. I wanted you awake at 3 in the morning, wondering who knew what. I wanted you to look at old friends and see possible witnesses. I wanted you to hear a knock at your door and feel your stomach tighten. I wanted you to understand one fraction of what Emily lived with during her final months. I would like to tell you every decision I made was for my daughter. It wasn't. Some of them were for me. Some of this was justice. Some of it was grief wearing a suit and pretending to be patient. There were nights I enjoyed imagining your fear. I am not proud of that. I am also not going to lie about it. The difference between us is not that I am a better man because I never wanted revenge. The difference is that I knew wanting something did not give me permission to invent it. I would not fabricate a document. I would not break into an account. I would not threaten Camille. I would not destroy Cross Meridian just to hurt you. I would not tell prosecutors that you killed my daughter when there was no evidence you did. There were lines. Not because you deserved restraint. Because Emily did. If I crossed them, then every truth I uncovered would become easier for you to dismiss as the work of a grieving old man who had finally lost control. I had already failed her once by giving her analysis when she needed faith. I would not fail her again by making her restoration depend on a lie. There is something else I never told anyone. Not Lena, not Russell, not Mira. After Emily died, I found a voicemail on my phone that I had never listened to all the way through. She left it 6 days before the accident. At first, she sounded angry. She said she knew I thought she had been reckless. She said I was probably right. Then there was a long silence, and she said, "Dad, I know I messed things up. I just need one person to understand that I'm not the person they're saying I am." I stopped the message there the first time. It took me 3 days to finish it. At the end, she said, "I wish you'd just tell me you believe me before you tell me what I should do next." That sentence did more damage to me than anything you ever could, because she was right. I loved my daughter. But love is not always experienced as love by the person receiving it. Sometimes it arrives disguised as instructions, sometimes caution, sometimes silence. By the time I learned that, she was gone. The thing I wanted most from you was the only thing you could never return. The time, not the company, not the money, not an apology. Time, one evening to sit across from her without a legal pad. One phone call in which I said I believed her before asking for evidence. One more Saturday at open window, while she complained that I was hanging shelves crooked. You could lose everything you own and still not give me 1 minute of that back. Once I understood that, your suffering became much less interesting. That was when I turned my attention to what could still be repaired. Open Window had survived in pieces. A few programs continued through partner organizations. Several former instructors kept weekend workshops alive without using the name. After Mira's investigation, former donors started calling. Some came back because they felt guilty. Others because the evidence had changed. Recovered funds from the financial proceedings began moving through the proper channels. A civil settlement returned money that should never have left the foundation structure. I contributed part of Emily's estate. Russell donated. Camille did too. She did not tell me until later. We created the Emily Harrow Community Arts Fund, not a monument. Emily would have hated a monument. The fund pays for classrooms, supplies, instructor stipends, and free programs in neighborhoods where children are usually told art is a luxury. The first grant bought cameras for a youth photography class. The second repaired the roof of the old open window building. That made me laugh. Emily had been promising to fix that roof for 4 years. Your money did not become mine. I never wanted it. Where restitution or settlements legally returned funds connected to open window, they went where they belonged. The rest came from people who chose to rebuild what had been damaged. Last month, I stood outside the storefront while they put Emily's name back on the door. Not in gold. Nothing. Grand, just letters above the glass. Open Window Project found by Emily Harrow. Children were inside arguing over paint. One boy had spilled blue across an entire table. One was playing music too loudly in the back room. It was imperfect. She would have loved it. That was when I understood what revenge had never been able to give me. Continuation. You thought I wanted what you had. Your office, your reputation, your security. I wanted back what you had taken from her. Not her life. No one could return that. But her name, her work, the truth about who she had been. Those things were still reachable, and they are back. Which brings us to this tape. You must be wondering why I sent it. It would have been safer not to. Your lawyers may listen to this someday. A prosecutor might. A journalist. That is why you will notice I have confessed to no crime, because there was none to confess to. You may call what I did revenge. I probably would too. But every document I provided was authentic. Every person made his or her own decision. Every investigation was independent once it began. I did not send this recording because I need credit. For most of the last 2 years, the greatest advantage I had was that you did not know I was involved. If victory were the point, silence would have been better. I sent it because you built your life by controlling narratives. You decided which pieces people saw. You decided when Emily was unstable, when you were betrayed, when the board was disloyal, when Camille was manipulated, when investigators were political. Every time reality threatened you, you changed the story until you were standing in the safest part of it. So this is the one story you do not get to interrupt. A man who controls every narrative deserves. Once in his life, to sit through a story he cannot interrupt. You cannot call a publicist while this tape is speaking. You cannot adjust a headline. You cannot lean across a table and make me doubt what I remember. For 40 minutes, all you can do is listen. Perhaps you will turn it off. That is your choice, it always was. But before you do, there is one last thing. This recording was not made only for you. There is another copy. Not the whole thing. You are not important enough to become part of Emily's memorial. The open window archive will receive only the part about her, about what I got wrong, about what she asked me to understand, about why I spent 2 years correcting the record. Someday someone may ask why an old fraud investigator cared enough to spend the end of his career rebuilding the reputation of a daughter who had made real mistakes. I want the answer preserved. Not that her father proved she was innocent. I did not. Not that Emily was perfect. She wasn't. The answer is that people deserve to be remembered in proportion to the truth. Your story made her one thing. A scandal. She was more than that. She was careless and generous, proud and frightened, brilliant in ways that made practical people like me tired. She trusted too easily. She lied to me. She protected you long after you stopped protecting her. She made bad decisions. She also built a room where children who had nowhere else to go could make something beautiful and take it home. Both things can be true. That is what you never allowed anyone to say. Now they can. The tape is nearly finished. I can hear the reel slowing from where I am sitting. I am in my car outside open window. It is raining. Emily used to record rain. I never understood why. When she was 11, I told her every storm sounded the same on tape. She told me I was not listening carefully enough. She was right about that too. Tomorrow morning you will go to court. A judge will decide what happens to your freedom. Maybe the government proves every allegation. Maybe it does not. Maybe you spend years in prison. Maybe your lawyers dismantle parts of the case. I genuinely do not know. That outcome belongs to people whose job is to decide it. Emily's name is back on the door. That part belonged to me. You did not lose everything all at once, Julian. I made sure of that, not because I wanted you to suffer slowly, although I would be lying if I said the thought never comforted me. I did it because each lie protected a different part of your life, and each one required a different truth to remove it. Your company did not leave because Camille left. Camille did not leave because a journalist called. The law did not come because I asked it to. They all left for their own reasons. I simply made sure they finally had the information you had spent years keeping from them. There is no final move, no document hidden under this tape, no photograph, no last witness waiting outside your door. That is another thing you will have to learn. Sometimes, the punishment for losing control of a story is discovering that the story no longer needs you. I spent 2 years believing I was dismantling your life. What I was really doing was separating my daughter's life from yours. That work is finished. So after this tape ends, I will not call you. I will not visit. I will not attend the hearing to watch your face. Whatever happens next will happen without me. For the first time since Emily called me crying, I have nothing left to investigate. I think she would tell me to go home, so I will. You thought I wanted your life, Julian. I only wanted you to stop living inside hers. Goodbye. Click.